And let's do the 4 limitless contemplations. May all beings have happiness and create the causes of happiness. May they all be free from suffering and creating the causes of suffering. May they find that noble happiness which can never be tainted by suffering. May they attain universal impartial compassion, free of worldly bias towards friends and enemies. Semchen tamche dewa tang dewe ju tang den pa ju chik, dungal tang dungal chichu tang tra wa ju chik, dungal mepe dewa tampa tang mindra wa ju chik, nering chak tang ni tang tra we tang nom chempo la ne pa ju chik. So good evening, everybody. It's lovely to see you. And tonight we're going to do part 2 of emotional intelligence, the Buddhist way. If you missed part 1, you could just go onto YouTube on our center's website and get it. It's nice if you can keep a full thing, because I can't repeat everything that I said in the session last time, but I like it to be interactive, especially with emotional intelligence. But I want to say one thing, and that is that EQ, emotional intelligence, is really related to the brain function. We were talking about the amygdala being the seat of emotions in the brain, okay? And that relates to our coarse energy in a physical body. But in Buddhism, it says you can change this to a totally different view. So you can use your emotional intelligence, your EQ. You certainly need it to negotiate the waters of samsara. You need to be different in your relationships and how you handle all your emotional situation, okay? You need to become aware, to understand and relate to people in a really caring, empathic, compassionate way. But to get a more subtle view where you understand truly the emptiness of these emotions, emptiness, which doesn't mean nothingness, it means those emotions arise because of the codependent arising. In other words, emotions are there because of this, because of this, because of this, because of this. They all come as a result of that. But actually, when you look at them very deeply from a much higher perspective, you actually see through them. You see that emptiness means full of possibility, which means the emotions come, the emotions go. Even if they stay for a long time, it is up to you to really see them differently. And that's where Buddhism takes emotional intelligence to another level, where it's really a very, very different level. And so I've got some lovely stories tonight that I want to share with you, which I think are really very deep and important. I want to show you how professions actually use emotional intelligence, or should use emotional intelligence. And lots of people, like in the medical profession and everything, say, you know, I don't like my job anymore. People come in, I diagnose, I give them pills, I prescribe for them. They want something more. So these stories are very relevant, where Frank is a middle-aged internist, the director of one of the medical clinics at a Midwestern inner city hospital. For some time now, he has secretly thought about leaving medicine for something else. He really wants to leave for something else, but he something more satisfying than that. Someone suggested that he tries a physician's training program that I teach. This was Rachel Raymond, before he made any big choices. And for the past 9 months, he's been reclaiming for himself that which is very satisfying in his work. That's what Eugene was saying last week about how we've got to change the satisfaction of work, okay? He tells the story about returning to his clinic after a weekend workshop on the power of intuition. Now, remember, intuition is really important in emotional intelligence. His clinic is a large teaching hospital. As faculty, part of his job is to see those patients who have no teaching value. Those who present a medical challenge or a diagnostic problem are saved for the younger doctors who are still in training. On this particular Monday afternoon, one of these patients, a Mrs. Gonzalez, was his regular 2:00 appointment. She was an elderly lady, maybe 80, in the last stages of breast cancer. No further cancer treatment was available to her. So at each visit, he would listen to how her week went, adjust her pain medications, and treat any other complaints she had as best as she could. On this Monday, as always, he made adjustments in her palliative regime, and then, thinking of the weekend, he decided to take a few moments to reflect and see what his intuition had to say about her. So much to his surprise, his intuition suggested that what would be most helpful for Mrs. Gonzalez now would be for them to pray together. Okay. He was not a praying man, but that's what his intuition said. And he began to sweat. Professionally, this felt risky to him. He reviewed the danger checklist from the workshop in his mind. Was there some reason not to do this? Would following his intuitive insight cause anyone harm? Would it delay or negate some needed treatment? Would it embarrass or humiliate anyone? Going down the list, he couldn't find a reason to discard his insight. So there it was. So Frank turned to this ill grandmotherly patient and said, Mrs. Gonzalez, perhaps it might be good if we prayed together. She looked at him and began to cry. Fortunately, he didn't do what he'd been trained to do years ago when a patient cried. He didn't call a nurse. He did what he had learned to do in another one of his training workshops. Taking her hand, he simply received her emotions respectfully and waited. Still holding his hand, she said, "That would be very wonderful, doctor." Then she told him she was a Catholic and asked him if they could kneel down. Shaken, he looked toward the door. It was closed. He was on highly unfamiliar ground, but he was in it already, and he decided to continue. "Certainly," he replied. So in his white coat, his professional great thing, he helped her to kneel down and knelt down with her in the tiny examining room. She began to pray, first in Spanish and then in English. He had not prayed for many years, but a calm settled over him and his memory awakened. His memory awakened by the sound of her voice, gave him back a prayer from his childhood. When she had finished, he said it aloud. There was a long, comfortable silence. Then very gently, the old woman reached across and touched his cheek. First in Spanish and then in English, she asked God to bless him and strengthen him in doing his important work. He says he can still feel the touch of her hand even 6 months later. He remembers it when things get tough and it helps him. He often prays with his patients now, both for them and himself. One of the reasons that many physicians feel drained by their work is they do not know how to make an opening to receive anything from their patients. The way we were trained, receiving is considered unprofessional. The way most of us were raised, receiving is considered a weakness. Now, I start with this story because I really want all of you tonight to open up, because if you're on a Buddhist path, one of the most important things is to open up without judging another human being. And that's one of the important aspects of the emotional quotient, the emotional intelligence, that we able to open up. And that is very, very interesting, because tonight I was listening to James Lowe on a YouTube talking about Dzogchen and all of that, very interesting. And he said, the most important thing is not to have a rigid idea of yourself, not to define yourself by all the things people always told you about yourself. But if you've got a terrible boss and she says horrible things about you, not to define yourself. But if you've got a partner that really puts you down or does things like that, not to be challenged by that sense of self which doesn't exist in Buddhism. And he was saying, James Lowe, and I want to really write down some of the things he says so I can give them to you another time. But he was saying, we are just energy, moving. And he said, look at me. I'm sitting now. Now I'm sitting in a cross-leg position. He says, I've got one hand on my knee. I've got one hand here, or I've got one hand on one eye on the television. He said, and this is it. He said, and in 5 minutes later, I'm going to be using my hands or doing something. I'm going to be moving and shifting my energy. And he says, if you remain absolutely sealed in the self that you think you are, how limiting you are to your own self. And that's what's so important about this emotional intelligence, which will go a little bit of a summary from last time, but I just want to give you some of the things to introduce tonight. But what is really, really important is that we understand that whatever we see in other people is simply our projection of how we see them based on our complete karmic imprints and how we are disposed and what our parents taught us and how we look at things. Now, when we go on to a Buddhist approach of emotional intelligence and beyond, we actually have to look in a very spacious way. So like this week, I got a text from somebody who was very critical of me, very critical about things that I was doing and how did I give things that were sometimes beyond people's mind. I got quite a shock when I actually read this thing. And then I stopped. My usual response to that would have been like to go for the jugular and go for everything. And I actually said, I'm very sad for you that you feel this way. And of course, I'm listening to what you're saying. I may not agree with it. Then I got this whole message about how sadness is only your projection. And if you feel sad for me, blah, 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 blah. And at that point, after my lovely message that I'd carefully thought out using emotional intelligence, I thought the best now is to just close the curtain and accept that this person is like that. I am sorry that this person is like that, but it's okay. I don't have to have shaky ground. I can look at that in a different way. All the criticisms that we get, as I've always told you, are mirrors to really teach us how to be differently. And what was very interesting with James Lowe's thing is that he was saying there, you need to be absolutely open and absolutely spacious, changing. This is it for now. And in 5 minutes, the whole thing's gone. And 10 minutes later, and a day later, and a year later, it's completely different. So why are we attaching and analyzing and fixating on whatever it is? Now, the other little story I want to give, I've got so many tonight, but I can't give you all of them, was a group of psychologists was studying the relationship between attitude and happiness in children. The researchers invited 2 children to their laboratory to undergo observation. One child was described as joyful, playful, and a positive little boy. The other boy was reported to be negative, poorly adapted, and a very unhappy child. The scientists began the experiments by placing the child with the negative attitude in a room filled with popular toys. The boy went from toy to toy to toy, playing with each of them for a few minutes. After 15 minutes, he was bored. These are yucky toys, he complained. Get me some fun ones. Whereas the other little boy, they put the positive child in a room with a large pile of horse manure. From the other side of a two-way mirror, the scientists watched to see the child's reaction. Oh boy, they saw him exclaim, there must be a pony somewhere. Okay. And you know what? That beautiful thing lies the secret of all this emotional quotient, because there are so many people, whatever you give them, they're bored, they're restless, they're critical, the finger's pointing. And the other people, just give them one thing. I can see it on my texts. You know how people text me and then they say how they were feeling in that last talk or whatever the case is. And I love it. I love to hear how people were feeling if they didn't want to tell me in the group. I love it if you tell me in the group as well. And I'm very, very happy to be criticized or to be pointed at. But the bottom line is, if we are changing every minute, and if we are looking into the emptiness means full of possibility. If we are looking at the emptiness, the full of possibility of every conceivable situation, then how different is it? How come we've landed up in South Africa and we've landed up in South Africa and we are really going through a really bad time in South Africa right now? And, you know, is there a positive way around this? Is there a self-aware, not aware of self, but awareness, which is one of the most important things of the whole thing? Is there an awareness that we have of how things really are? So I want to just do, if you could just put up the cartoon about the teenagers, please, Fee, because that's another one. Okay. Teenagers, tired of being harassed by your stupid parents, act now, move out, get a job, pay your own bills, do it while you still know everything. Okay. And that's what teenagers are. Even when your children grow up, they know everything and you know nothing. Thank you, Fee. It's just to make you laugh a little bit if you can. Okay. And then looking at Dzongsa Khyentse's description, when he was talking about Vajrayana practice, and I was talking about it yesterday at the group, but he talks about why is Vajrayana suitable for this modern world? That was his topic, Vajrayana or tantric practice for this modern world. And he said, why? What are the reasons it's important? So he said, would you all think that non-violence is a very important thing in the world? So everyone said, for sure, non-violence is. And he said, what is so interesting is that non-violence, he said, belongs to the modern interpretation of when emotions are enemies. When your emotions are enemies, that's when you've got violence. When you see your emotions as they really are, then the violence, it's a non-violent way of looking at everything. It's such an interesting thing when you really, really think about it, because he said non-violence, and then I think I told you this, he said confidence in your Buddha nature. So I think I told you the story. He took a cup and he asked someone for a chocolate. And then he ate the chocolate, put the chocolate all messy on his fingers and put it on the cup. And then he said, I think I told you about this. And then he said, you know, why do you keep the cup? Why don't you throw the cup away? It's dirty. No, you don't throw the cup away because you really believe that that cup can be washed, that its essential nature is clean. And so because of that, you don't throw the cup away, you take it and you wash it. Now, in exactly the same way, we have this Buddha nature, which is absolutely and totally, essentially pure and clean without being tainted. All we've got to do is wash away some of those obscurations. And it's really important because Trungpa Rinpoche spoke about both severing and bunching. He said, first of all, if you sever your emotions, that means that you're trying to cut them off. You've had enough of them and you try and get rid of them. He said that doesn't help because they're still inside you. And so if you rather look at them and see them for what they are, that is so much better to do it in that way. And he also said the other thing was bunching. And I think we all know bunching. It's pretty much like you're in a bad mood, okay? So what happens is you're really feeling pissed off about something. So everything gets a little bit of that anger. Wherever you are, someone gets a grumpy thing, someone gets, and often when you see these kind of bosses who are so unamenable, I used to often, Shane, people are really trying to come in and out. I used to often think to myself in the days when I did work for somebody, I used to often think to myself, it's so clear to me, even in those days, that your frustrations about your life come out in your work. They really do, because you actually, I remember one particular woman who, if you were doing well and you were doing great and your life was okay, she really was nasty to you. That is a total projection of her stuff. Now, in emotional intelligence, we really, really, really have to look at the qualities I was telling you about last time. I'll just mention them and then I'll throw it open for all of you to discuss. But when we look at the qualities of emotional intelligence, it's self-awareness, that's knowing your emotions and defining them as they happen. And remember, in Buddhism, self-awareness doesn't mean awareness of the self. It means an awareness which is self-contained, which can really see what the emotions are all about. It's self-control and restraint. I spoke about them last time. Zeal and persistence, the ability to motivate yourself, highly productive, creative, mastery, a flow of good performance, and the ability to deal with others. Now, it's such an interesting thing because some people just can't deal with others. Other people, you see them walking along the street, and as I said last time, you greet them, you absolutely are able to connect with them because you're aware on that emotional amygdala of the brain level, you're awake, okay? And there's growing evidence that being ethical comes from your underlying emotional capacities, that if you're ethical and you really don't harm people in any way, you have an ability to read other people, to read them, which is really, really, really a point. Now, I was seeing on the television tonight, just while I was eating supper, I always watch a little bit of the news, and there was this movie that this guy made on Sudan. And in this movie, I just saw this one little scene where her husband, someone was going to attack her with all the civil war and everything. Someone was going to attack her, and he took his gun and shot this man. And then you just saw the scene where she was looking at him. She was just sitting like this. And he said, I had to protect you. And she says, why didn't you shoot him in the leg? Why did you shoot him dead? She just couldn't get over that he'd shot this man dead before he'd attacked her. And he said, I was defending you. Now look at that scenario and just ponder it. Ponder what we do. Half the time, we're so busy protecting a self that is not inherent to us, that is not who we are, that is transient and changing every minute of every day until we die, and then we leave it behind altogether. And we're still protecting it all the time. So with all of that, that was a big mouthful. Maybe somebody wants to say something or ask something or comment about it. I'm so happy if you do, because I think that this emotional intelligence is really important, really important. And a cousin of mine sent me something called Churchillisms, and they were Churchill's sayings, which I've got a few written down, but maybe somebody wants to say or ask something at this point. Anyone?
I want to hear those Churchillisms. I love Churchill.
Yeah, they were lovely. I'll read you some of them. They're really beautiful. He said, diplomacy is the art of telling people to go to hell in such a way that they ask for directions. I love that one. And then he says, fear is a reaction, courage is a decision. I think these go so well with emotional intelligence. And then he says, success consists of going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm. I love that, you know. And then he says, a pessimist sees the difficulty in every opportunity. An optimist sees the opportunity in every difficulty. He was such a clever man in a lot of ways. He had a lot of EQ. And then he says, I'd rather argue against 100 idiots than have one agree with me. And then he says, a good speech should be like a woman's skirt, not like me. Long enough to cover the subject and short enough to create interest. Those were the ones I wrote. He sent me a whole pile of them, lots and lots of them. So anyone got anything they want to say, and then we'll go on to a lot of things that I want to give you. And I've got some beautiful stories that really reflect what all of this is about. Anybody want to ask anything, say anything related to themselves in any way?
Mel?
Yes, please.
Just a little comment.
Tatiana.
Everything that is good about a person, what they consider their good qualities, is also very much tied with their idea of who they are, with their self.
Right.
So
yeah.
If you take that further, if you're going to not worry too much about yourself, what's left? Your good qualities, your bad qualities?
A very good question, that. It's a very good question, because you know what? It's very interesting. Because in actual fact, we should never even call them good qualities and bad qualities. And I'll tell you why. Because what this James Lowe would say is, he goes, good qualities are those you think you should cultivate. And sometimes people try and cultivate them, and they're not even true to the particular person, in any way. What we've got to understand, let's rather say, natural qualities. Now, if you look at the Buddha nature, when the Buddha nature is working through you, all the qualities, if you could call them good, then that's fine, because they are compassion. I'll give you the clothes off my back. I really care about you. I worry about you. You are, all those qualities that come naturally through you are those awakened qualities. They always are good. But in fact, sometimes when you see somebody, like you see one of these masters beating up somebody, or one of these masters, you know, some of them would hit their students on the floor, and you'd go, oh my God, that's such a bad thing. How can this wonderful master do this? Every single thing that they do is out of compassion. I'm talking about a real Mahasiddhi. Every single thing they do is out of compassion for the other person to realize who they are, because it never comes from the space of ego. And so it's always interesting to watch people like Ekong Rinpoche, how he responds to people. How he did respond to people was the most fascinating thing, because I sometimes saw him so, you would say, nasty to someone, okay? And then you go, oh God, look at him. I told you once, I heard him actually, I was in the office somewhere, and I heard him actually scream at somebody and say, I am not your father. Now, I was so shocked. Everybody was shocked because he was the father to everybody. Why would he do that? Never coming from an ego space. It was that he could see the karmic imprint of what this person was doing over and over and over again, maybe playing a victim, maybe making people rescue him all the time. And so by saying, I am not your father, he was shaking him out of his complacency to actually make him use his resources in a way that would be absolutely fantastic. Now, when you think about that, our motives, our good qualities are all done for ego. Not everybody, but a lot are done for ego. I'm giving you a good lecture, and I would like to hear that you really appreciate my lecture. It's an ego-based thing. It's an absolute ego-based thing. Whereas when they do what you would call a negative quality, they are doing it for the absolute benefit of the other person, so that the other person doesn't go on making all those blunders. It's fascinating. So what I'm saying to you is, we've got to stop categorizing things into, this is good and I want it. This is bad and I need to get rid of it. This I really desperately must have. This I really am averse to. We've got to stop, because from the Buddha nature, you can see from these really realized beings, makes no difference to them. When that same Ekong Rinpoche jumped in, I mean, I read the story, everybody was hounding, there was this terrible blockage in the drain, okay, and this is really a true story. And so everybody said, oh my God, all the sewage was in front of the drain, and you could only get to the drain and unblock it if you walked through the sewage. So everybody was going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. He stood there, took off his jersey, took off his watch, walked right through the shit, whatever you want to call it, okay, walked through it, unplugged the drain, while all the monks who absolutely adored him were standing there in absolute shock, got out of the water, took his watch, he stunk to high heaven from walking through the sewage, and went home for a shower. Absolutely nothing about it. You know, so it's such an interesting thing, because tonight I'm certainly saying, develop your good qualities, but let's not be hung up on good and bad, because sometimes you have to shout at somebody, or you have to take a stand to somebody, because you can't say yes sir, no sir, because you are helping them to create the most terrible karma. So it's a very interesting thing. If you want to do it at the emotional intelligence, human level, then that is fine. But then you do it that way. But if you want to take your Buddha nature, and people are going in and out, if you want to take your Buddha nature and have it really respond, then there's no good or bad. So I'm glad you asked that question. It's really a good one. And it's something to ponder, isn't it? Now, I want to tell you something else. I was telling them yesterday that I'm busy now taking about 100 files with all my lectures over years and years and years and years, okay, that I've done. And I'm like getting rid of a few and putting them all into boxes, because I need to, if I want to move out of this house at some given point, I've got to do something with them. But if I get rid of all of them, if I burn them all, then if I ever want a subject matter, I've got to start from the beginning. And it's really good for me to have the subject matter that I've done a lot of research on. So I was doing it. And I came across, I told everyone, yes, I came across this amazing thing in my folders that I'd completely forgotten about. It was called Direct from Lama Yeshe Rinpoche's Teachings and Transmissions. So actually, I was with him on Holy Hour, and he gave me a lot of instructions and many, many things that particular trip, which actually blew me out of orbit. And I have no idea why I just forgot about all of this. Okay. And obviously it was time to remind me, and I came across it, and I was really in quite a lot of shock when I read, because I wrote absolutely everything he said. Okay, I'll tell you that over time, what he actually said to me. But one of the things he did while I was on Holy Hour there yesterday was, one evening, he sat with a group of us and he spoke about his childhood and all that had befallen him. The responsibilities on young kids, they had to go out, they had to look after the animals, and they had to, and he says he was sent to rigid monasteries at the age of 8, and he really didn't want to go. That's why he was so rebellious for a long time. And his brother Akon was in charge, and he was very scared of him. He said, and he had an older brother who tried to always soften the blows that Akon did. And that brother also died when they were leaving Tibet. So he lost that brother. He never saw his parents again. He had terrible, terrible illness. He nearly died, I don't know how many times. Punishments, harsh learning. He said every conceivable negative karmic imprint. And I wrote this down. Okay. And this is very important for emotional intelligence. Yet he said, and now this is my point, he had no leftovers of any residue of any of this. Nothing. Okay, isn't that interesting? He said it's all illusory and has no bearing on his life. Okay, now I was hectically, this was in 2011, I was hectically into my psychology. And okay, I want to get other people to get rid of all their psychological garbage and trauma, which is one of the things I want to just mention in the emotional intelligence. And so the next morning, of course, I barged in and I said, I want to know how you could let go of these imprints of all these traumas. And yet I said, I see Westerner after Westerner after Westerner, and trust me, they never can let go of their imprints. But just to add to this, which is very interesting, is that very often over the years, my husband would send me one of his workers who was having some trauma or some trouble or a marital problem or whatever the case is, and he'd come. And in one session, I could absolutely help these workers. Whatever I told them in one session, and they told me, they went and they actually carried it out And then I'd ask a few weeks later, how are they? They're absolutely fine. So there's also a sense there that in some way they don't hook onto the negativity. Now, when I asked him that question, I want to tell you his answer, and you may give me your own answer. He answered, the guru, the lineage transmission is first and foremost. He said, that's the first thing. If you've got a connection with the lineage, that means the lineage, the teacher, if you have got one, and everybody else. And then he said, seeing the true nature of things, it is all dreamlike illusion, has no power at all. So it dissolves into illusion when you realize the truth. And he spoke about how his whole relationship, I won't go into it now, with the Kamapa, I'll do it another time, and how he appreciates everything he's received. Now, what was interesting is that a lot of people say to me, well, how can we do that? Oh, he nearly died, he said to us, and always the Kamapa helped him through it, and he didn't die any particular time. And so what I want to tell you is that before I left that holy isle, he called me in and he said, all problems and suffering are because of an ego, because of a self. Once you see the illusion of self, you are past all of that. And he also said to me, I want you, and I wrote this down so that I didn't do it properly. He said, I want to tell you something, that you are all connected, he told me, to this lineage tree. And if you give up self and ego and surrender, then you'll always have this connection, life, death, everywhere. And he said, I want you to tell the people that you teach that they have got a connection through you to him and to the Kamapa, through the lineage to them. And he gave me that very, very specific instruction, which was really very, very interesting. I thought maybe you want to comment about it. The most important thing, because sometimes, and this is where emotional intelligence really comes in, and the talk has turned out completely differently to how I planned it in my mind, but never mind. I'm just saying to you, once you have the connection with your Buddha nature, the emotional intelligence coming from the amygdala in the brain is really important. How you deal with your life, how you deal with people, your empathy, your connection, your understanding, your working with people, all of that is essential. But once you have the connection to your Buddha nature and the lineage, and you have that light through you, you are always protected, even in death. And then you see the emotional stuff in a very different way. So talk to me. I'd love your cameras on. I know it's hard because we've got load shedding. Our load shedding, I think, is over. Anybody want to say or ask anything? It's important because all this that I've given you is really important, I think. I wasn't going to give it like that, but that's how it came out. Linz, do you want to say something?
Hi, Melanie. Hi, everyone. No, just really interesting. I mean, we had quite a bit of a discussion on this a couple of weeks ago now. So that's why I was grinning earlier. A lot of it resonates. So no, thanks. It's just very interesting and I'm listening. Thank you.
No, that's lovely. So anybody want to ask or say anything? Please speak if you've got anything on your mind, and then we'll do a meditation, and then I'm going to go on with a few other things which I think are really important, and I have beautiful stories to illustrate. Eugene?
Yeah, I was listening to Oprah today, and she was speaking to this lady called Dr. Shefali about raising children and stuff. So, and it was about how most parents try to fulfill their own ego through their children, and when they can control the child is good. When they can't control the child is bad. And like, I think that's often how we view ourselves and often how we view our colleagues and other people as well. When I can control you and get you to do what I want, then you're good.
Yeah.
When I can't do that, then you're bad. And so that was like when you talked about the kids, like I thought like, oh yeah, so that was coming to mind. And then they said, like, it doesn't mean you don't discipline your child, but you intervene and you lay down the law and say, but this behavior is not serving your higher self. Like you talked about like intervening and saying, I'm not your father. It's like, this is not serving your higher self. But that, yeah, so that was quite cool. So like all in one day, the same kind of topic came up.
Wow, that's so good. And that means that it's relevant to what what you've done today.
Yeah. And like the one thing that was cool that Oprah said is like, if it applies universally, it must be the truth in all situations.
Yeah,
So,
but now take that statement, which is really very relevant, but think about what we have made the truth in our relative level as sentient beings or human beings, if you want to call us that.
yeah, but it's all the narratives we tell ourselves. So if I take my own thing, it's like my new job has not always been easy, and I've been perceived as a threat and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Even though you're trying to play nice and make people so, but then I also realized like I was trying too hard to prove myself. So then I watched a clip on Instagram where the person said, if you come from desperation, you're not coming from your talent. She's like, yeah, but I'm broke. And the person's like, you're not broke. You have talent. You have infinite potential. So you need to come from your talent, and then things turn for her. And I applied this thing, and suddenly I went from trying to make people see the value to me magnetizing work and opportunities to me. So it's very interesting about that limitless abundance mindset, or in our terms, the infinite wisdom and the infinite universal source energy, or the nothingness, like you described it.
That is so brilliant. And that's really what I'm trying to say tonight, because it's so important. Mark, did you want to say something?
Yeah, first of all, I want to say that Jade wants to say something.
Jade, poor little Jade. And she's all over the world. I don't even know where she
No,
is. I didn't even see. Okay, Jade.
am I right, Jade? You're muted. You're muted.
Unmute. Am I muted now?
No.
No.
Yeah, you
All right.
were.
I don't want to lose the strand of thought. So Eugene, I was so close to what you were saying, because if our parents, with how their control as rearing the kids, only had that little example when they had their parents, so it's like a transference, right? Because now you're dealing with people who end up not being peaceful, and then they surround then they create unpeacefulness for the people who they're surrounded by, usually.
their next of kin, their, their spouses, and that's the complication I'm fully living. And so it's not conducive to,
Yeah, so I think the core lesson from that talk was that your children come through you and they're not of you. So they don't belong to you, even though society says that kid belongs to you, they're my children. But the trick is they come out of, I don't have children, but like, so it was an interesting thing to listen to, but like she said, that's the trick, is like, you have this kid to complete you, and like, but then that kid is there and says, I'm not you.
I'm not doing what you're telling me to do
I
either.
need to resonate, and I need to fulfill my mission on this earth, or my ticket. I need to live my truth. I need to realize my purpose. I need to, and so Oprah said, like, she wanted her one kid that she sponsors all these young girls, and she wanted to go to that school when she was young, but she couldn't. So then she encouraged that girl to go to that school, and that girl broke down because she was miserable. It wasn't the right fit for her. And then she realized, I projected my lack on my kid, the lack that I had when I was young, and what I wanted to achieve and couldn't. And you're not allowing that child that you're only supposed to guide and not even protect and make happy all the time. You need to allow that kid to feel the full human experience, the sorrow, the heartbreak, being dumped at your prom or your matric dance, all of those things you need to. So, but like, there's this high expectation, your kid must be ahead of the curve to be good. Your kid must be at the top to be sorted and looked after. You must, good parenting comes naturally. So those are all myths, and it's all fear-based relationships. I fear I have lack, and then I project that onto somebody. And we do it in all our relationships, whether it's romantic or otherwise. But like, true love is enabling that person to be themselves, and also to sit within in their reality, in their energy that they're
what they need to be, to give them the space to be what they need to be, not your projection. And this is the point in the emotional intelligence of your relationships with people, that when you are with people, you need to step outside of yourself, outside of your norms, outside of everything. You need to be able to look at that person. It's taken me years and years and years to do this. Okay, many years, and I still can't do it properly. But it's when you allow that full thing, it's because immediately someone speaks to you. You see it in terms of you. Meanwhile, it's got nothing to do with you. Sometimes even I've got 4 children, and sometimes I step back. And you know what a mother's like? You're always telling them what to do, how to do it. Don't do this, do that. Do this with your wife, do this with your husband, this kind of thing. And kids today don't listen to a single word you say anyway. But the bottom line is, it's so interesting, because I even said to my one son the other night, where did you come from? And of course I know where he came from. He might have come through me, but he certainly came from his own background, his own spiritual things, his own everything. And you can't make people do what you want them to do. That is what real taking emotional intelligence and taking both the rational side, the left side of the brain, which is rational, and the right side of the brain, which is feeling, where the amygdala is, and getting a balance. Because when we are emotional, then the whole of the rational goes out of the window. But when we rational, I mean, I listened to Dzongsa Khyentse Rinpoche talking about, I think I mentioned it yesterday as well, talking about the Vajra hells. And he asked the people, do you know what the Vajra's hell is? So anyway, he said it was really very, very interesting, but this was his description of the Vajra hell. Let me tell you what he said. I always write notes because otherwise I forget. He said, if you think the burning or the freezing hells are terrible, you know, the whole description of what people give you, what we've been given for the hell realm, he said, those are nursery school. He said the Vajra hells are the, he said, the realm of rationalism, sensibility, and reasoning, logic, causality, the whole world of dualism. That's called a Vajra hell when people are in it. And you know what some people are like? They're so rational, they're so critical, they live in a realm of logical reason, causality, and all of that. That's called a Vajra hell. It means there's no open possibility of how you can be. Such an interesting thing, don't you think so?
Very.
So
Mel,
interesting. Yeah, please.
just a quick one. I'm so happy you're bringing science into today's chat. With the amygdala, which is over here, right next to the hippocampus,
Exactly.
which
Yeah.
is memory as well. So a lot of research has shown if your amygdala is not stimulated,
Yes.
you'll have problems with emotional memory as well. And then also, interestingly enough, and this is what Buddhism is about, and this is science because it's proven, that you keep your amygdala healthy by stress reduction techniques such as meditation. Isn't that amazing? Because this is exactly what we're talking about today. And that's a way to stimulate scientifically your emotional coefficient or your emotional intelligence. I'm so happy that you brought the two together.
No, I bring that up and I read the life and science that the Dalai Lama does with the scientists. Now, let me read you what he says, because I wrote it down as well. Modern science sees the mind as an emergent property of consciousness that depends on the brain. Okay, so in other words, the amygdala, remember what I told them last week, is the amygdala sometimes hijacks the reasoning. When you're in a real emotional tiz, okay, the amygdala hijacks the reasoning part, and it's very, very interesting. I'll come to see yours in a minute. Tibetan Buddhism thought postulates a subtle order of consciousness, not dependent on the brain. Now listen carefully, because this is the Dalai Lama talking. He says that extremely subtle levels of consciousness that have yet to be discovered by the West are accessible for advanced meditators who can use them for lucid dreaming and conscious dying. If confirmed by science, he says, it would mean radically altering the paradigm of Western neuroscience. In other words, Western neuroscience has taken all of those things that we spoke about last time, the amygdala, the brain stem, all of those kind of things. It's taken all of those, and that's how we function. But the Dalai Lama, in Sitting in the Mind and Life series, says there is, when they asked him, can you train the mind to be different? He said, Buddhism says, definitely. With awareness, you can train the mind to be different. So if you've got an emotion Yes, you can learn in a relationship to rather say to the person you're fighting with, not you are an idiot and you are this and you are that and you make me sick. You can rather say, I'm very upset by what you've done, or it's really upsetting for me that you've done. Then you might get a message back like mine, well, your upset is your own projection, blah, blah, blah. You know, a lot of things like that, but that most people wouldn't respond like that. So there are ways of dealing with your anxiety and all your stuff, which are very good. And emotional intelligence teaches us to do that and to have that awareness and not to project onto other people what you want for them. Like James Lowe says, the child says to the parents, Mom, Dad, let's go to the swings. And then the mom and dad says, no, there's no time today, Johnny, to go to the swings. Sorry. And then he's looking at them and he's thinking, I can't understand you. To go to the swings is the most wonderful thing in the world. It would be absolutely brilliant to go to the swings. How can you say no? You know, we say no because we've got another agenda, but how many other things? Not going to the swings, but how many times do we take our children and want them to be a particular way and they aren't like that, just what Eugene was saying. And this is where we go beyond. When the anger is there, we're able to see it for what it really is. The anger comes out of the essence. It's not solid. It's not you. It's not permanent. It's none of those things. And can we see through and get there? That's what's important. So let's do one tiny little story and then let's do a meditation because we haven't got much time for anything else. So this is one of the doctor stories as well, because I really think they're so amazing. And Harry, an emergency physician, tells this story. One evening on his shift in a busy emergency room, a woman was brought in about to give birth. The nurses rapidly wheeled her into a room and paged him immediately. Then they rushed past him to call her obstetrician. Harry realized it was too late and was pleased, as he liked delivering babies. The baby was born almost immediately. While the little girl was still attached to her mother, Harry laid her along his left forearm. He took a suction bulb, began to clear out her mouth and nose of mucus, and suddenly the baby opened her eyes and looked directly at him. In that moment, Harry stepped past his technical role and realized a very simple thing, that he was the first human being this baby girl, he said, had ever seen. I'm saying had ever seen in this life that she was coming in, okay? And he felt his heart go out to her in welcome from all the people everywhere, and tears came to his eyes. Now, Harry has delivered hundreds of babies, but he's never experienced the true meaning of what he was doing before that moment. He'd always been preoccupied with the technical aspects and needs and dangers of the birth. This time, he was the physician and the human being together. He wonders how many other such moments or connection he has missed. He suspects there may have been many. Now, that is such an important story, because many, many, many times when I'm even talking to people, they say to me something like, but Melanie, and then they tell me something. I'm telling them something else and they tell me something. It's like a direct connection that you have with that person. Now, you may not even agree with what they're saying, but at that moment, you have a total appreciation of them, their whole karmic background, their emotional disposition, their everything that they've got, you at that moment in time are right there, connected, even if you don't agree with what they're telling you. And that's what we've got to do, to go past the normal conditioning of the amygdala. Because I had a whole section tonight, but we don't have time to do it, on trauma, on what happens to you with post-traumatic stress disorder, what happened to you if you have trauma and that imprint is in the amygdala. Well, that imprint, the amygdala, is obviously connected with the alaya consciousness. That trauma is there. But now I've just given you that example of Lama Yeshe Rinpoche, who had so many traumas. I mean, when they were leaving Tibet, they had the most terrible trauma. But why are they not affected by it? Because somewhere, number one, they've got a connection to who they really are. And number two, they understand that this is just a temporary drama being played out. And that's what we're learning. And then there's a whole section on illness and how illness comes about because of the emotional input into your body and things like that. So it's really a it's a huge subject. I mean, we could go on discussing it for weeks, but I won't bore you with it. But I think it's really important that all of you understand this completely. That moment. Let's do the meditation. And we'll also go back to that lovely one on thinking that I did last week, but we'll do some others as well. No matter what the quality of the view is, whether you are happy or sad, good or bad emotions, whether appearances are fearful or pleasant, whether mind is active or passive, you do not tilt our mind towards any antidote. Whatever appears, you look nakedly at the essence of the appearance as it arises, and without modifying it in any way, without analyzing, bunching, severing it off, judging it, you just let it be. And when you let it be, in that very moment, pure presence in all its clarity arises from within. Dajjung Rinpoche says at his mountain retreat, whatever the sensory field, whatever the object, you gaze at it like a child enwrapped before an altar in the temple. You don't clutch the sensory specifics. You hold to the freshness. Freshness is the most important word in all of this emotional intelligence. Let it be in its own place without contriving anything about it, without changing its shape or complexion, and without adulterating it with any conceptual fixation. Then all appearances will arise as the naked primal awareness of clarity and emptiness in pure presence. Now, don't do this as an intellectual exercise. Actually do this in your everyday life, not allowing yourself to totally engage in everything, just seeing it for what it is. And remember last week, I was telling you about the dancer who had rage and she danced the dance of rage. And suddenly the bell went. And when the bell went, the word went, thinking. And the dancer settled back into the meditation. And then she began to dance the dance of anxiety, fear, hiding herself, ducking herself, diving herself, in and out, always hiding behind things in absolute fear. And suddenly the bell went, thinking. And she remembered, she was aware. She came back to the breath. And then she danced the dance of spaciousness. And in the middle of it came this little depression, this little sadness. And she got really sad, and she danced the dance of tears and of real anguish in her pain. And suddenly the bell went, thinking. And she came back again. It all dissolved of its own accord, remembering that last week we went right back to birth, taking that continuous imprint that went on and on and on. Maybe nobody understood me. Maybe I felt despair. Maybe I often felt disappointed. Maybe I judged myself. Maybe I didn't think I was worthy. Maybe I had terrible anxiety. Maybe I thought I wasn't as good as other people. Just look at it. And the bell goes, thinking, and bring yourself back. It was never anything tangible, solid. It didn't have a shape. It didn't have any solidity. It wasn't you. So let it fly up into the spacious sky of your mind, where everything can be accommodated and everything can dissolve back into its own emptiness, full of possibility, full of the essence, nothing real, just a temporary drama in your life. How sad that I have kept my whole life looking at how I wasn't good enough for anything. And now I see it was just a temporary drama. And I bring myself back to who I really am. Someone that really wants to touch the lives of other people. Give them a moment of feeling really safe, okay, of understanding them, of extending beyond the boundaries of my human self, coming right into a beautiful moment with another person where I fully and totally can understand and feel compassion for them. I think it's enough. We can't do all the other things I had planned for you. We'll go on to another subject because there's so many, there's so much, about people being right and intellectual, about relationships and divorce and flooding with emotions. What else have in business, corporate and management and medicine and managing your emotions and trauma. Just remember with trauma that even though the imprint might be there, you have to distance yourself and see it as temporary, transient, impermanent, and not you. And that takes a lot of practice. Sorry, I didn't want to see your beautiful chats. If you don't want to say it. Oh, in higher consciousness, that's good. Good, good, good. So anyone want to say anything? Let's dedicate to everyone, and then I'll stay if you want to ask me anything, because I really just think that it's so important that we can get to that point of understanding it. You don't have to be a master, and you will make a mistake, and you do need emotional intelligence to help and serve and work with others. You definitely do. But those are all the temporary things of this life. And that's what's important, that you don't get bogged down. And that, Tati, you don't even think to yourself, this is good and this is bad. Because as soon as you're dividing, you're in the world of duality. The world of duality is a Vajra hell. So what's a Vajra heaven? Is a Vajra heaven where everything is good and everything is nice? No, a Vajra heaven is when your mind is attuned to your real nature. And so whichever negative situation you are going through, you can appreciate it, you can deal with it, you're not swamped with all your emotions that you can't see straight, and you get it. And like I've been saying to so many people, I can't tell you how many people I say to when they say, what can I do about this? And it's really driving me mad. And I say, stand back outside of yourself. Stop seeing yourself as this little person that's only got limited functioning. Stand outside yourself and fill your whole world with the spaciousness of your mind, and let that real mind, and don't even call it a higher mind, then you haven't got connection with it. Just the true nature of your mind, let it operate through you. Then you'll know. So if you're in a lousy situation at work, just stop before you respond. Let that mind come through you. And it's amazing what actually happens. I just know that when I'm in a bad way, I just come and sit in my shrine room, which has a beautiful energy and a beautiful atmosphere. And I just think it through. And if it's really, really bad, if it's a really bad day and I've had a really bad experience, I write it down. I almost write letters to myself. Then I probably tear them up a few days later. But the point is, I'm clear about it, and then I can turn it around and look at it. There should never be long sulks, long, bad energy. You've had something, say your bit, try not to do it destructively, and then move on to the rest of it. And you can eliminate trauma. And it's interesting because when I attended a lecture, it was quite a while ago. At that point, they said with post-traumatic stress disorder, you don't have to do debriefing. When I trained, we were taught, if somebody had a traumatic experience, the first thing they've got to do is share it with you and get it all out. And you know that that's not even the modern way to deal with it. Now, that's very interesting because Lama Yeshe Rinpoche said he didn't need to even talk about it anymore. I do need to talk about it, but I can see it as temporary and transient and not any of those things. But it's very interesting because if you've had a trauma in your childhood, or you can have emotional relearning. Because what happens is, if you're hanging on to it, every time something similar happens, you're into the response again. That is what gets imprinted in the amygdala that same thing, and then you react like that again. So you have to reprogram. You have to be able to see it for what it is in the karma, in the everything, and let it dissolve. And it is possible. So I'm gonna wait here if anybody wants to talk, but let's dedicate to all the people that are going through trauma. It's absolutely terrible. In the wars, in all the wars that are going on, when I think of people getting executed for their beliefs, I saw that Uganda is trying to pass these gay laws. And do you know that there is a death sentence? That's what they want to impose, a death sentence on people who are gay. I mean, can you imagine the trauma of all of that is just beyond. Okay, but I'm dedicating all of this to all the people that are caught in all the circumstances of their life, in traumas, in stress, in starvation, in wars, in ugliness, in dictators. We dedicate, may anything that came out of tonight be able to be beneficial to them. And through this merit, may we achieve all-seeing Buddhahood, and thereafter, once all harmful enemies have been defeated, may all beings be liberated from the ocean of existence, stirred by the waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. Sonam die tamche zipane topne nepe dranam pamshene jeganachi bala dropaye sipe sole doa dro warsho. Oh, wait.